Sonnet 29, or I Think of Thee, by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, was published in 1850 as part of a collection of 44 sonnets entitled Sonnets from the Portuguese. They had in fact been written some 5 years earlier, before Barrett Browning's marriage to her husband, the fellow poet Robert Browning. Never intended for publication, they are passionate love sonnets tracing the progression of Barrett Browning's love affair with her husband-to-be, from the doubt she felt at their meeting to the passion that she felt for him prior to their elopement. Upon reading them, however, Browning declared that they were on a par with Shakespeare's sonnets and should therefore be published. In order to spare her blushes, the title of the collection was to falsely allude to the idea that they had been translated from another language. The working title, Sonnets Translated from the Bosnian, was changed on a suggestion by Browning to Sonnets from the Portuguese. Browning's nickname for his wife, due to her dark hair colour, was My Little Portuguese, and constituted, therefore, a private and intimate pun. The poem loosely follows the structure of a Petrarchan sonnet. It has 14 lines, divided into an octave, 8 lines, made up of 2 quatrains, and a sestet, 6 lines, with a base metre of iambic pentameter, didum, 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 and a rhyme scheme of A, B, B, A, B, B, A, C, D, C, D, C, D. Whilst her rhyme scheme generally conforms to the rules, Barrett Browning plays around with the metre somewhat. The first 6 lines are rhythmic iambic pentameter, but after that, line lengths vary from 10 to 12 syllables, with the substitution of trochees, dum-dee, anapaests, diddy-dum, spondees, dum-dum, and hypercatalectic lines, the addition of an extra unstressed syllable, to disrupt the rhythm and enable her use of double or feminine rhyme at the ends of lines 9, 11 and 13, e.g. in sphere thee, hear thee, and near thee, which necessarily has its stress on the penultimate syllable, dum-dee, rather than the last syllable, as dictated by iambic rhythm, didum. Sonnets also usually have a volta, or turn, marking the end of line 8 and the beginning of line 9. Simply put, the octave usually presents a problem or a situation, while the sestet either comments on the problem or provides a solution. The volta in Barrett Browning's sonnet, however, is more elusive, and I'll explore this as we go through the poem line by line. In terms of language and imagery, the poet uses the extended metaphor of vines growing around a tree to communicate the way in which her thoughts of her lover grow uncontrollably until they obscure his actual presence. There is extensive use of the word thee throughout. Thee is an archaic form of the word you, which had already fallen out of common parlance long before the Victorian period. Used in the same way as the French tu to indicate a singular and informal you, it communicates intimacy and tenderness. Sonnets were also out of fashion at the time that Barrett Browning was writing, having enjoyed their heyday during the Elizabethan period. They had seen a revival during the Romantic period at the end of the 18th century and into the beginning of the 19th, but by the time Elizabeth Barrett Browning was writing, very few sonnets of any note were produced. It should also be considered that the poet's preference for thee over you might be a means of harking back to an earlier golden age. Note that there are also words throughout with long E sounds, such as tree, sea, green, instantly, greenery, deep, and breathe, and long ear sounds, such as dearer, in sphere, here, and near, all of which echo the long E sound of thee, as though her choice of words is influenced by the very thought of him. The poem starts abruptly with a short exclamation, I think of thee, followed by a caesura. The emphasis created by the exclamation mark and the dramatic pause created by the caesura indicate the passion that she feels and communicate that she is now going to expand upon the consequences of this. The juxtaposition of this four-word exclamation with a sentence that then takes up the rest of the quatrain communicates the dramatic and inevitable consequences that she undergoes when all she does is think of him. The poet uses a simile. My thoughts do twine and bud about thee, as wild vines about a tree put out broad leaves, to evoke the way in which, once she starts thinking about the man she loves, her thoughts take on a life of their own. The imagery relating to organic growth and the enjambment at the end of the first line gives the poem momentum and evokes the burgeoning of the vine. The verb twine is not only very sensuous in its tactility, as it conveys the idea of something twisting and winding about him, but is also very sensual in that it evokes a yearning for physical intimacy between the pair, which would probably not have happened until after they were married. The adjective wild suggests that her thoughts are untamed and uncontrollable. The internal rhyme of twine and vines enhances the idea of the growth being meshed and interlaced around him, as the rhyme itself is within the lines of poetry. And the fact that the leaves are broad indicates the extent of them, all of which builds up an image of her being obsessed with him. Her thoughts cannot be stopped, though, and threaten to smother him as soon there's naught to see except the straggling green which hides the wood. Her choice of imagery is interesting. Vines that grow around trees, such as ivy, are usually parasitic and have no benefit for their host at all, and the adjective straggling is in itself not very flattering. Is this a reflection on how she feels about herself? We know that she was dogged with illness, most probably tuberculosis, for most of her life, which left her weak. Did she feel that she was a burden on him, and therefore somehow unworthy of him? She introduces the next quatrain with the conjunction yet, to indicate that this is not what she wants most of all. Her use of an apostrophe, "O my palm tree," to address him directly, increases the sense of emotion. Her choice of a palm tree as a metaphor for her lover is an interesting one. Much of Barrett Browning's work contains religious allusions and imagery, and she could be drawing on the Christian symbolism relating to faith and belief embodied in the palm trees that were laid beneath Jesus' feet as he triumphantly entered Jerusalem. Palm trees are also a symbol of fertility in an otherwise barren landscape, and it could thus represent the flowering of a love which would have been totally unexpected for a 38-year-old invalid who was largely confined to her own home. Note the use of enjambment here, as she rushes to reassure him that, despite how it might seem, she would not replace his physical presence for her thoughts of him, because he is dearer, better. The substitution of two trochaic feet here, e.g. dearer, better, dumdy, dumdy, along with the exclamation mark, are the first instance of the rhythm being broken, as she introduces the idea that his presence is superior to her thoughts and is enough to stop them in their tracks. As mentioned earlier, Petrarchan sonnets usually contain a Volta at the beginning of line 9, which signals a change in tone and perspective. It has been argued that this could be at the beginning of line 5, where Barrett Browning, introducing her thought with the word yet, which is a common indicator of the Volta, acknowledges that she would not rather have thoughts of him than his actual presence. It could also, however, be in the middle of line 7, where she presents her solution to the problem. He should rather instantly renew his presence, or come to her forthwith. It's interesting to note that it is from line 7 that the rhythm simultaneously undergoes dramatic changes, with hypercatalectic lines and the substitution of the usual iambs for trochees, spondees and anapaests. Why she chooses to put the Volta before the rules allow is worthy of exploration. Perhaps it is because her passion is such that she cannot stay within the confines of the poetic form she has set herself. Is she just impatient to see him, so she brings the Volta forward by a full line and a half, or even by 4 lines, so that she can make this happen sooner, at least in terms of the poem? Is the choppiness of the rhythm in this latter part of the sonnet to enhance this sense of impatience? Her tone also changes. Although her language takes a form of control with her use of the imperative mood to command him to renew his presence, the action is all to be on his side. She is helpless. It is up to him, as a strong tree should, to shake her thoughts off by rustling his boughs and setting his trunk all bare. Once again she breaks the metre with the substitution of a trochee at the beginning of line 9, with the image of him moving to break free of the confines of her thoughts, embodied in the confines of the poetic metre. Note also the sibilants in these lines, which not only enhance the onomatopoeic rustle, but also evokes the sensual physicality of the image, where she entreats him to bare his trunk. Trunk is another word for torso, and so the erotic undertones of this image are clear. The next image, "And let these bands of greenery which ensphere thee drop heavily down," contains the longest line in the poem at 12 syllables, as the poem builds to a climax, as she imagines him finally shaking off the bands of greenery, or her thoughts, which ensphere, a word she appears to have made up, or encircle him. The next line, "drop heavily down," burst, shattered, everywhere, depending upon how you read it, can contain more stressed syllables than you would expect. Scansion, or the working out of the rhythmic pattern of a line of poetry, is very much an art, not a science, and different interpretations are possible. I read it as drop heavily down, burst, shattered, everywhere, where the first 3 iambs are substituted with a spondee, dum-dum, an anapaest, dididum, and another spondee, dum-dum. The result is that the line sounds very heavy. This is further enhanced by the pause created by the caesura, the plosion of the onomatopoeic burst, and the sibilant shattered, evoking the weight of her thoughts as they fall and smash on the ground. Just as her thoughts around him are breaking up, so is the rhythm. The final 3 lines describe the way she reacts when she is in his presence once more. The cumulative effect of the polysyndetic triad of verbs, to see and hear thee and breathe, in conjunction with the use of enjambment at the end of line 12, evokes the way in which she is consumed and overwhelmed by the deep joy caused by his presence. Once more alluding to him as a tree, she asserts that she is able to breathe within his shadow a new air. It is almost as though he is giving off oxygen, which she finds refreshing and invigorating and symbolic of a new life that he can offer her. The final line of the sonnet revisits the first by negating it, "I do not think of thee," and then by providing a reason and a resolution, "I am too near thee." It evokes the way in which, during the first heady weeks and months of a new love affair, the very physical presence of the loved one is enough to disturb your thought patterns. Her thoughts are now impossible because she is overwhelmed by the emotions and physical sensations that he arouses in her. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques, and English literature texts.